Hello my friends, welcome back to my channel. Me and Kazi are here to tell you about my top 10 romances in 2020. I'm very excited. So, I've been waiting to do this video all year. I could not wait to talk about my top 10 favorite romances for the year, but then the closer we got to the end of the year, the more I was like, I can't choose, like there's too many good ones, and I feel like that's such an amazing problem to have. But still, this was really hard to narrow down my top 10 romances across all subgenres for the whole year because I feel like I've just read so many amazing books. So the ones that I picked out to be in the top 10 are ones that I still think about, that I remember how I felt when I read it. Like, they're books that left such an impact on me that I just can't forget about them ever. So I feel a little bad that I left some of them out. But the ones I have on my top 10 list, I am positive you're not probably going to be too surprised by what's on here. You may be surprised at the order that they're in because I'm going to go from number 10, so my least favorite on my list of top 10, I mean they're still a favorite, down to my number 1 book of the year. So, I don't think you'll be surprised about book number 1, but we will see. So I also have some books that I wanted to mention that I feel like were almost there, almost on my top 10 list. So these are 5 books that I still absolutely loved, talk about them all the time, but they just didn't have quite the same impact as the top 10 did. So the first book that I want to mention is To Beguile a Beast by Elizabeth Hoyt. I absolutely adore this book. I have mentioned it so many times. This is a historical romance, Beauty and the Beast retelling. We have a grumpy hero. They're not really enemies to lovers, but they have a little bit of an animosity at the beginning. This follows Alistair, who is a grumpy, scarred hero who lives in this really run-down castle, basically. This is a Regency romance, though, too. And then we have Helen, who shows up on his door to be a maid. She's just escaped a duke. She was the duke's mistress, and she has escaped with her 2 kids to try and be free of him and live her own life, and she ends up on Alistair's doorstep to try to be his maid. He, however, tries to just send her away because he didn't hire a maid. He doesn't want her there. He doesn't have hardly any servants there, doesn't want anything to do with her. But because it's such a dark and stormy night, he agrees to let her stay for the night with her kids. And then their romance happens from there. And the thing that I love the very most about this book is I feel like this is one of the best books that really show like how this love story might actually work, especially when children are involved, when there are so many things that are against them, and I just really especially loved watching this grumpy guy really actually not be such of a grump after all, and the relationship he had with the kids, how he tenderly fell for Helen. It was just absolutely wonderful. I loved it. Another book that almost made the top 10, almost, like this almost made it, was The Prince of Broadway by Joanna Shupe. I just recently read this and I absolutely loved it. This is such a fantastic book. This is another historical romance, but this is a Gilded Age historical, so it's set in New York in the late 1800s. This follows Florence and Clayton. Florence is the daughter of a very wealthy family. They live an extreme life of privilege. And she really sort of wants to break free of that and live her own life. She's very independent, very forward-thinking, wants to build this casino gambling hall that is just for women. So she seeks out Clayton, the hero, who is the owner of the most successful casino that there is. And she asks him to teach her how to run a successful casino. And he is so very alpha and so hard and a little bit brutal, but the way that he so tenderly loved her was just fantastic, and I couldn't get enough of this. This is also very, very female-powered. There are strong feminist themes in here without ever really hitting you over the head, but just watching Florence really fight for her independence and then watching Clay really allow her the space to grow and be who she wanted to be without any force on his part was amazing. And another book that almost made my list, but not quite, was No Good Duke Goes Unpunished by Sarah MacLean. I freaking love this book so much. This is part of her Rules of Scoundrels series, and it follows Temple and Mara. Temple is known as the Killer Duke, and Mara is the woman who he was supposed to have killed when they were 18. she disappeared, suddenly shows up into his life when he is a fighter, a really unbeatable fighter at this casino for people to pay their debts. And Mara shows up wanting to have him forgive the debt that her brother has racked up there if she goes ahead and lets people know what actually happened and that she's not dead, and his reputation will be redeemed. Totally loved this book. It was so great. Another book I want to mention is Culty by Mariana Zapata. I feel like everyone has read this, so you probably know about this. This is an enemies to lovers, age gap, sports romance where they're both athletes. This is Saul, who is a soccer star, and her coach, Rainier Culty, who she's kind of had this thing for. He's an extremely famous soccer star. She's had a huge crush on him since she was a little girl. He is now her coach, and it is the very slow burn romance of them falling in love, and I just freaking adored it. Now, honestly, like, I feel like everyone loves Mariana Zapata, but you know she's going to be a slow burn, and it really was, but it was just so worth it. I just loved it so much. And the last honorable mention that I have is Sea of Ruin by Pam Godwin. This is a dark historical romance, and I freaking loved this book. This follows Bennett, who is a female pirate, and she is on the run from her pirate husband, Priest, when she is captured by Lord Ashley, who is a pirate hunter. And it's the very, very complicated and dark story of their relationship. It's honestly, like, I feel like there are a lot of trigger warnings in this book. Like, I feel like make sure you go into this book prepared if you want to read it, because it is very dark, has a lot of things that would definitely be triggering. So make sure that you check those trigger warnings if you're interested in reading this, but if you're okay with them, I would highly recommend it because it was fantastic. Okay, and now we are on to my top 10 favorite books of the year. As I was getting this list ready and looking and reading up the descriptions again and remembering them, I just showed you. I was like so excited about these books, and I know you're not going to be surprised. So the number 10 on my list is Baron by Joanna Shupe. I love this book so much. I just discovered Joanna Shupe in this year, and I honestly have really admired everything that she has written. Some of it hasn't quite hit me all 5 stars, but I've really loved all of her writing, and this book was just fantastic, and I feel like this is still the best book of hers that I have ever read. This is really one of her series that doesn't get much attention, doesn't have very much love, and I don't know exactly why that is, because this book is fantastic. This is another Gilded Age historical romance. It follows Will and Ava. Will is a very successful, very wealthy railroad baron who is currently running for lieutenant governor. Ava is a medium, and she has all kinds of, oh, what are they called? Like seances and shows where she's really trying to, you know, hoodwink people into thinking she's telling the future. She's really built a career out of this, and she's very successful. Will and Ava end up meeting at a seance that she has for the governor who is running with Will. Will finds out about that, and he is very alarmed that there could be a huge scandal breakout that the future governor is at this seance, and so he tries to make Ava stop taking these jobs from the governor and go away, and Ava is not going to have any of it. Oh my goodness, I love this book so much. The reason I love this book so very much is because there was so much, like, contention between them. Like, Will did not want, like, he was not really disgusted with her. Like, it is an enemies to lovers, but he's so, like, trying to push her away, but at the same time, he's just so completely intrigued and attracted to her that it's just, like, fantastic. And there are some things that he does that really show how he actually feels for her without actually saying it, and it was just so completely lovely. Watching this kind of jerk completely fall for this woman was just, I just loved it so much. So I highly recommend this book. I freaking loved it. It was great. It was really fun and really unique and very different for a historical romance. It was fabulous. Okay, and number 9 on my list is again The Magic by Lisa Kleypas. I loved this. This was probably the first book that I read by Lisa Kleypas where I was finally like, okay, I get the hype of her, you know? Like, it was just honestly swept me away and just transported me into this time and this place, and I just loved it so much. This book follows Aline and McKenna, who meet as children and they kind of grow up together. Aline is really a lady of the period, you know, she lives in this really wonderful home. It's set in England, and McKenna is a servant to her family. They start out as friends, but when they're in their late teens, like 18 or 19, they end up having a really brief and passionate love affair, and something pretty tragic happens where they are found out, and Aline's dad is really set on ruining McKenna and just destroying his life because of what happened. So Aline steps in and tries to protect McKenna without McKenna realizing it, and McKenna gets banished and sent away. He ends up going to the Americas, where he becomes a really self-made man and has built a life for himself where he's extremely successful. Now, I believe 20-ish, I'm not sure exactly how many years later, many years later, when they're both adults, McKenna returns to England to Aline's family for a business deal. And the minute they meet again, it was just, like, you could just feel the love that McKenna still had for her. When he comes back to her, he's intent on getting revenge for breaking his heart on Aline. But you can also see, like, the thing that I feel like was so great about this was watching how conflicted McKenna was, because he so clearly had such strong feelings for Aline. Like, he just could not be denied. So this whole plot that he has to try and ruin her, just like, it was never gonna happen, because he was just so completely gone for her, and it just was so wonderful. Like, the very end where he really just declares his love for her was, honestly, I was sobbing. It was just so beautiful. I love this book so much. And number 8 on my list is Dark Needs at Night's Edge by Kresley Cole. This is part of her Immortals After Dark series. This book follows Conrad, a vampire, and Naomi, who is a ghost. I know, right? Like, that's what I thought when I read it. I was like, how is this going to work? But this is honestly the most hauntingly, achingly sweet love story. I just honestly loved every single second of this book. Conrad is a vampire, and he's really sort of like a dangerous vampire. Like, he's on the edge of madness. So he is restrained. His brothers take him to this rundown mansion, and they sort of chain him up there and leave him, hoping that that will cure him, that will fix him. But that's where Naomi is haunting, and so she sees him there, and he can see her. And he's the only one who has ever been able to see her. And I just, you guys, I loved this book so much. This book feels very different from the rest of the books in this series. It's such a quiet and soft and beautifully evolving love story while still being super steamy and sexy, and it was just, honestly, like, I cannot say enough good things about this book. I just absolutely adored it. It was fantastic. The way Conrad loved her, oh my gosh, you guys, it was just so great. Okay, and the next book I have to talk about is The Rayquest by Scarlett Peckham. This is book number 7. This is book number 7 on my favorites of the year. I read this book this year and was completely blown away by it. Now, I'm gonna go ahead and say that this is a very polarizing book. People seem to either really love it or really not like it at all, and I definitely fell on the side of I absolutely loved it. This book is a gender-swapped version of a rake, so she is the Rayquest. She's, you know, living a life where she, you know, is not burdened by society standards of not being ruined. She's already been ruined. She's living that life, and she is proud to do so. And but she's also really carrying like a lot of sadness and a lot of trauma in her life that she's really struggling to overcome throughout the book, and isn't really doing such a good job. So she's definitely sort of self-medicating with alcohol and sex and really kind of pushing all of her trauma down. But the love story in this was honestly so, just made my heart just ache for these two. And it definitely does end in an HEA. Like, I don't want to dissuade you from reading this, because I know that not everyone loves it, and it definitely does feel heavy and sad through a lot of the book. But it ends with such a wonderful happily ever after. So the love interest, the hero, is Adam, who is a widow. He has 2 young children who deeply, deeply loved his wife, and he meets Seraphina, and their first meeting was just honestly so cinematic to me, and it was so just filled with so much longing and also so much, like, sparked so many attractions. I just loved their first meeting. He's instantly attracted to Seraphina and really intrigued with her because she's so very different from any other woman that he's ever met before. And they start to have a love affair, a physical-only love affair, pretty much. But pretty soon, Adam really starts to develop feelings for Seraphina. He wants to act on those feelings. And Seraphina is starting to develop those feelings too, but she's very much repressing them. She's really afraid to love. She's really afraid of the consequences of what love will bring into her life, and she's afraid to trust in that. And so that's why she's always just had this life of just, you know, physical only relationships and just get it out of her system and all that stuff. And I really honestly loved watching these two very damaged, very hurt people really slowly and painfully try to overcome all of that and find happiness together. I just feel like this, so I love this book so much, and it's not your typical historical romance. There's really not a lot in here that is happy until you get to the end, you know? I mean, there are some things that are happy, but it's very much a process of watching Seraphina realize what she's doing to her life and being willing to take a chance on actual love, because she's been very hurt in the past. You know, like the whole plot of this, her whole job, she's writing her memoirs, she was a ruined woman, she's really trying to, and not like by, so like the thing that, okay, this isn't going to be just a whole series about the Rayquest, but she's trying to really push forward equality and women's rights, but not necessarily by like having people sign petitions or picketing or anything like that. Like, she's living that life and trying to just live the life that she wants to live and be accepted by that. But she's also not fighting or trying to force that acceptance. She is unashamedly living the life that she wants to live and letting whatever consequences happen about that just happen. I don't know, you guys. This book was powerful, and it was just beautiful, essentially. And it was sad, and it really was kind of melancholy in feel throughout most of the book. But ultimately, it was about how you overcome things in your own life that you are responsible for, and also not giving in to what people tell you should do with your life. I just loved it so much. Honestly, the more I talk about this, like, should this be higher? I don't know. Okay, and the sixth book on my list is Take a Hint, Dani Brown by Talia Hibbert. This book is a freaking masterpiece. Whenever I think about what I want to tell people that the romance genre should be, or what it looks like, I think about this book. I feel like this is a perfect example of how romance books should be. Not always. I mean, we want diversity in our romance books, in all types of diversity, but I just feel like this book does romance to just perfection. I just loved it so much. So in this book we have Dani, who is, you know, she's also a bit of a player. She doesn't want to commit to anyone. She just really wants to have a good time with people. She's bisexual. She is a very educated woman. She's a teacher. And she meets Zephyr, who is I believe the security guard at the school that she works for. And they have this amazingly adorable moment where they both realize that they have an attraction to each other. And it's when Zephyr rescues her from a stalled elevator that happened during a fire drill or a gas drill or something like that. And so because of that, that got caught on video and it went viral, and they became known as like this famous social media couple. So they decide to enter this fake relationship to kind of help Zephyr's charity business that he has running. And obviously things go from there. They try to have a physical-only relationship, but pretty soon they come to realize that they have feelings for each other that just can't be denied. I loved this book so much. I feel like it had so many swoony romantic feels. It was very sexy. It was very empowering. It was very just enjoyable from first page to last page. There were some honestly laugh out loud romantic comedy moments in this, but it also really dealt with a lot of those serious issues. Like, it talks a lot about anxiety and mental health and PTSD trauma and things like that, but without ever really being super melancholy about it, you know? And I feel like that's why I put this above the Rayquest now that I'm thinking about it, because I definitely feel like this handled that situation in a way that isn't going to bring you down and make you feel sad. It really talked about it in a way that was empowering and hopeful, and I loved that so much. This book, honestly, was pretty much perfect for me. I just loved and adored it. Zephyr is an amazing hero. He is the ultimate alpha mellow hero. It's just perfect. This book was so great, and honestly, it deserves every ounce of praise. Talia Hibbert can do no wrong. This was fantastic. Okay, and the 5th book on my list is A Heart of Blood and Ashes by Milla Vane. This book, y'all, like, I was not prepared for how deeply I was going to love this book. Honestly, I feel like when I thought about this book before, recently in the last few months, I've been hearing a lot of buzz about it, a lot of people really just raving about it. But before that, I kind of felt like it's going to be good. It's going to be a fun, high fantasy, Game of Thrones-esque with some romance, you know, and it just sat on my shelves for a while. So when I finally read it, and I realized that I was just, yeah, that was true, but like times 100, I was just so blown away by this. So this is absolutely a high fantasy romance. It definitely has excellent high fantasy elements to this that if you're not really into that, or if you don't enjoy that, or you're not familiar with it, it can really be hard to get into. Now, I consider myself a pretty good fantasy reader. I love fantasy, but I was still not completely sold on this until I was about 100 pages into it, you know? And if I hadn't had so many people raving about it, I probably would have DNF'd it, because it was difficult to get into, and not because it was info dumpy. That's something that I want to say right off the bat, is that this fantasy book does world building pretty much perfect. There is no info dumping. It's all shown to you as the story is laid out. You're seeing it through Yvenne's eyes, the heroine. Which reminds me, let me tell you what it's about. So if you don't know, this book is a barbarian romance. It is a high fantasy romance. It is about Madoc and Yvenne. I was thinking his name was Malik. Madoc and Yvenne. Madoc is a barbarian, and he has just recently found out that the king and queen, his mother and father, have been killed. And so he is enraged, and he is out to seek vengeance for who killed them, when he finds Yvenne, who is responsible, who he believes is responsible for their death. And she is from a, like, the society that's built in this time, it's a matriarchal society, so she says to him, what if we marry, or we have a child, and then if we have a child, then you will then be the new ruler, because it's a matriarchal society. So instead of killing her right off the bat, he says, okay, yeah, let's do that. So this is very much an enemies to lovers too, and I would say this is on the edge of really big enemies to lovers. Like, that is a huge part of this, and that was also one reason why this was just so freaking satisfying, is because they were completely enemies, like blood enemies in the beginning. But then over the entire course of the book, you watch Madoc and Yvenne slowly, very, very slowly start to have these powerful emotional feelings for one another. In particularly Madoc, like, oh my gosh, you guys, it was honestly a thing of freaking beauty. This is, if I were doing a list of the best fantasy romances of all times, this would be #1. This is, without a doubt, the best fantasy romance that I have ever read. It is so completely, beautifully well done. It really goes there to the dark, you know, brutal places that, like, I would expect of a barbarian romance to go to, but it also doesn't skimp at all on the romance. Like, it, not even a little bit. The romance in this is, it's just so slow building and passionate and all-consuming, and this again is another book, like, at the very end where I was literally crying because I was just so overcome with the emotion in this book. This is a complete masterpiece. I am a ginormous fan of Milla Vane now. I am blown away and impressed at this fantastic book. So if you love fantasy romance, if you really love that, and you haven't read this, like, you have to read this. This is just so good. I loved it. And the fourth book on my top 10 romance reads of the year is Wolf Gone Wild by Juliet Cross. I love this book so freaking much. And I honestly kind of debated about, was I going to put A Heart of Blood and Ashes ahead of this, or was I going to put Wolf Gone Wild? Like, this one was a tricky one for me to decide, because I love both of them so much, but I love them in such completely different ways, you know? Like, this book to me is just so happy, so fun, so romantic, so swoony, so spicy. This is just a complete joy to read from first to last page. And Juliet Cross built these characters, the couple in here, and just like they feel like real people to me, and I love and adore them so much. And this book was just honestly one of the best surprises of 2020 for me. I just loved it so much. So this is a paranormal romance, but it has a very, very, very contemporary rom-com type of feel. I think that a lot of times when we think of paranormal romance, we think of like a really gritty urban setting, you know, with a lot of darkness, and that's not what this is. Like, this is very, I don't want to say it's too lighthearted, because like it has some darkness to it too, but overall I feel like this is just such a happy, light, fun, joyful read. I just loved it so much. This book follows Evie and Mateo. Mateo is a werewolf who has a hex on him where he cannot shift into his werewolf form. And so that is sort of like a personality, like a voice in his head. His alpha werewolf kind of talks to him, and that was just freaking hilarious because he's so different from Mateo. And it's really causing him problems that he can't shift into his wolf. And so he goes to seek out Evie, who is a witch who is known for her hex-breaking ability. So, but Evie and her sisters, who are the witches in this book, like, they have this rule that they don't do business with werewolves because werewolves are so dangerous. But Evie is so taken with Mateo, and she has so much empathy and sympathy for him that she decides to help him out anyway, and it is really the slow and lovely, funny, sweet, sexy story of them falling in love, and it's just so freaking good. I just loved it so much. Like, I can't help but smile when I talk about this book because it was just so fun. This has become, I also recently read Don't Hex and Drive, the sequel to this, which was another 5-star read for me, which I wanted to put on this list too, but it was equally good. But this one, because it was the first one, really stole my heart. And Evie, who is a little bit of a geek, a little bit of a Star Wars fan, a little bit of like a graphic design nerd, she writes comic books, like, she has a special place in my heart because I also am that way. But I love this book so much. I cannot recommend it enough. It was just so great. So if you haven't read the series, please check it out because it's so much fun. Alright, now we're down to the top 3. Oh, so the third book. My top 10 romances of the year is Wolfsong by TJ Klune. I read this book and was just a complete disaster. It just wrecked my heart and soul for like a month straight. Like, I cannot express enough how much I love and adore this book, these characters, this world, this author. This author is precious and needs to be protected at all costs because he is doing an amazing work by telling these stories. So this is another it's a paranormal romance, but it's also another one that's like super different. It's basically follows this wolf shifter family who have just moved into the Green Creek area, and Ox, it actually starts following Ox, who is a human. We meet him when he is just a child. I believe he's like 12 when this book opens, and you sort of follow what happens to him in his life and his family and how he comes to meet this family of wolf shifters who he doesn't know that they're wolf shifters when they move into town. He ends up meeting Joe, who is the youngest son of that family, when Joe is really pretty small, and their first meeting is just adorable and heartfelt and happy, and just everything that is good in this world is in this book, honestly. Like, I can't get over the beauty of this book. I can't get over the complete hopeful feeling of love and acceptance that's in this book. It honestly, like, I'm on the verge of tears talking about this again. I feel like that every time I talk about Wolfsong, I'm like, I'm gonna cry because I love it so much. But so Joe and Ox, they meet as children, they grow up to be friends, and then eventually develops into something more. This is an LGBTQ owned voices and friends to lovers. But the biggest, but also like a huge part of this book, a huge theme in this book is the aspect of found family that is so completely beautiful and strong and just heartbreaking. And honestly, like, I want to just read this book again, just talking about it. This book is beautiful, and it is honestly probably one of, this is going to be one of my favorite books of all time, because it was just so heartbreakingly but hopefully beautiful. I cannot recommend it enough. This is fantastic. Again, if you're to pick one book off of this list that you have not read yet, like, please read this book. Seriously, this was fantastic. TJ Klune is amazing. I have read his other book, The House in the Cerulean Sea. I read that this year too. I actually read that before this one, and I had that on this list, but I had to cut it out when I was trying to get down to 10. But that one was another 5-star read for me, and that was the book that really made me a huge fan of TJ Klune. But I loved this book a little bit more, and it just really spoke to me and has stayed with me, and I cannot forget these characters. This was just a completely devastatingly beautiful book. What did you just do? Okay, now we are down to the top two. Top two books of the year. Both of these are also all-time favorites. Hello. For me, I loved them so very much, and number 2 is Brazen and the Beast by Sarah MacLean. This, quite honestly, was my number 1 book of the entire year until just recently, when it was slightly eclipsed by my number 1 book. But this book still remains a favorite, absolute favorite of mine. This was the book that made me just completely blown away by Sarah MacLean and just made me a complete fangirl of hers. I love this book so much, and everything that it's saying, everything that I can't get over this book. I still can't get over it. So this book is the second book in her Bare Knuckle Bastard series, and I do recommend that you read the series in order. You really, really, really need to read the series in order. So the first one is Wicked and the Wallflower. But this book is my personal favorite because it follows Hattie, who is sort of deciding that she's about to be a confirmed spinster for the rest of her life. She has just turned 29, and she has declared that the year of Hattie. And she's decided that before she becomes a spinster for the rest of her life, she's going to spend this year pursuing every aspect of pleasure that's available to her. She's going to live her best life for this year before she commits to a life of solitude and doing what society says and, you know, being a spinster forever. And she, you know, she wants to take over her father's business. She wants to be a really strong businesswoman. So there's I love that strong aspect of, you know, women wanting to have work and wanting to build their own life. I love that aspect of it too. Her plan, however, is kind of thrown awry when she meets Beast, who is also known as Wit, and he is basically a king of Covent Garden. And she meets him, and he's tied up in her carriage, and she literally kicks him out of the carriage. And it's just so honestly amazing. He's just instantly taken with her. They enter into this very seductive bargain for the year of Hattie, and it is absolutely delightful. This book honestly speaks to me on so many levels. Hattie is also a plus-size heroine, and she is just so empowering. She is so beautiful. She is just, honestly, this book makes me weep. I also marked up this book a ton because there was just so much in here that spoke to me. This book hit me on a personal level that I was just not prepared for. And Beast is an amazing hero, and the way he quite literally worshipped Hattie was just everything that I ever wanted in a romance. It was fantastic. I loved it. Cannot recommend this author enough or this series if to only read this book because it was fantastic. And now we come to my number 1 book of the year, and that is The Day of the Duchess by Sarah MacLean. This book, you guys, I just was completely blown away by the beauty and power in this book. I was unprepared for everything that it had that was going to happen in this. So this book follows Serafina and Mal, Seraphina and Mal, this is actually a second chance romance. So this book is just honestly also so clever in how it's written, because you have sort of back and forth timelines where you see the future, or not the future, you see the present day you see the present day Hal and Seraphina, but then you also see the past and what happened in their relationship before they met. I also will say that there is a trigger warning in this for miscarriage too, because I feel like that's something that people should know going into this if that's a trigger for you at all. So Hal and Seraphina, they have this honestly just bright light of a beginning of a love story where they are completely smitten with one another. They meet at a young age. They have an honestly amazing meet cute. It's hilarious. They're trading these barbs, you know, like Hal is so completely gone for her pretty much the moment he meets her, and specifically because of the things that she says. Like, he just falls in love with her mind right away, and she also just completely falls for him. They have this very brief, passionate love affair. They end up compromised. Someone catches them, and Hal is led to believe that Seraphina did that on purpose so that she could win him as a duke for a husband, which leads them down this road kind of heartbreak and devastation for a little while. And so the main gist of this story is that she comes back to his place where he is in Parliament to demand or request a divorce from him. And he says, after a lot of confliction, he sort of hatches a plot that says, okay, I will grant you a divorce, but you have to find a Duchess to replace you. So they end up on this quest to try and find a woman who will replace her as Duchess, all the while Hal is trying to win her back. And it was completely, utterly, heartbreakingly beautiful. I honestly love a second chance romance, but I also can understand how some people don't. But I feel like there's just something so powerful and hopeful about seeing two people who do really love each other have some real struggles that break them apart, and watching them find their way back together in love and happiness is just perfection for me. And there are so many beautiful moments in this. I mean, Hal is just completely gone for her. He is so in love with her, and he tries everything possible to win her. And the grand gesture at the end brought me to tears, and I just honestly I can't even form words about how this book affected me and how completely beautiful it was. It was, without a doubt, my favorite book of the year. It was amazingly beautiful and just perfection in pretty much every way. Highly recommend it. Also, I did not read the books prior to this. I just picked this up. My son picked it for me to read, and so I did. So I don't really feel like you have to read this one in order. You could definitely pick this one up on its own. And it was completely astoundingly beautiful and just reinforced to me what an amazingly powerful writer Sarah MacLean is, and the fantastic work she is doing in the historical romance industry. Like, this book was perfection. Alright, my friends, I thought I was going to make this a short video, but then the more I got talking about them, the more I just couldn't help but gush. These are my top 10 romances of the year, books that really impacted me, made me cry, made me swoon, made me happy, that I just would recommend to you too if you like the things that I was mentioning in those books. Thank you so much for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, please be sure to like and subscribe so you can see all of my future videos. Thank you, my friends. I'll see you in my next one.